Daniel Hawthorne stepped out of his sleek black car, barely glancing at the thunderclouds above as he adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit. His mind was still consumed by the numbers from the evening's gala, millions in future investments, a lucrative new property acquisition on the horizon, and yet none of it mattered as much as it should have. The moment he reached the top step of his front porch, something unusual caught his eye. A woven basket, damp from the rain, sat just outside the heavy oak door. He frowned. It was past midnight. No one should be on his property, let alone leaving something behind. And then it moved. A soft, nearly imperceptible sound rose from within. A whimper. A baby's whimper. Daniel stiffened. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, staring at the bundle, trying to process the impossible. The rain intensified, sending droplets streaking down the sides of the basket. Finally, he crouched, his pulse hammering in his ears. Inside, wrapped in a delicate blue blanket, was a baby boy. A note was tucked into the folds of the blanket, barely shielded from the rain. His name was scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. "Take care of him. He belongs with you." Daniel's breath hitched. He read the words again, his sharp mind searching for logic in something that made no sense. This had to be a mistake, a sick joke. Someone had left a child, a living, breathing child, on his doorstep. His fingers tightened around the paper as he glanced back down at the baby. The boy's tiny fists clenched and unclenched, his face scrunched up in discomfort from the cold. His dark lashes fluttered, and then, as if sensing Daniel's presence, his eyes opened. A jolt of something foreign shot through Daniel's chest. The baby looked directly at him. He had no idea what to do. His instinct was to call security, maybe even the police, but something kept him frozen in place. This wasn't just some abandoned infant from the streets. Someone had left him here. Someone had written his name on that note. "Sir?" The familiar voice of Alice Whitmore, his housekeeper, broke through the moment. She stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to pure shock as her gaze dropped to the baby. "Oh, my lord." Daniel straightened, exhaling sharply. "I need to call someone," he muttered, already pulling his phone from his pocket. "The police, child services, someone." But before he could press a button, the baby let out a sharp cry. Alice moved faster than him, bending down and scooping the child into her arms like she had done this 1,000 times before. "You poor thing," she murmured, rocking him gently, soothing his cries. Her gaze lifted, piercing Daniel's with something he couldn't place. "Who would leave a baby at your doorstep?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have one. All he knew was that, in less than a minute, his entire world had shifted. The call to the police was brief. Detective Julian Reed arrived within 30 minutes, his brown trench coat drenched from the storm as he stepped onto the porch. He had been in Savannah law enforcement long enough to know that Hawthorne Mansion was a place of exclusivity, not scandal. But tonight, standing before Daniel, holding a newborn in his arms, the story felt different. Reed took a slow breath. "So, let me get this straight. You arrived home and found a baby left specifically for you?" Daniel exhaled. That's what the note said. He held it out, watching as Reed scanned the message, his brows knitting together. No identifying information. No signature. Daniel shook his head. Reed glanced at the child. "Anything familiar about him? The note says he belongs with you. Is there any reason someone would think you're connected to him?" A headache pressed at Daniel's temples. "Number, I have no children. No one I know would do this." Alice shifted, still cradling the boy protectively. "He looks well cared for," she pointed out. "He isn't malnourished. He's clean. Someone loved this baby before deciding to leave him here." Reed nodded. That means we're not dealing with a neglect case. More likely, someone hiding something. Daniel didn't like the sound of that. He wasn't a man who enjoyed being wrapped up in other people's problems. He built his empire on control, on logic. This was chaos in its purest form. Reed slid the note into a plastic evidence bag. I'll run some checks, see if there are any missing child reports matching his description. In the meantime, he hesitated, then met Daniel's gaze. You'll need to keep him here. Daniel blinked. Excuse me? The legal process isn't instantaneous. We need to find out who he belongs to, but until then, it's best if he stays somewhere safe. Given that whoever left him chose you, that makes this mansion the safest place. Alice, to Daniel's horror, actually smiled. That's wonderful news. Daniel shot her a look. I run businesses, not nurseries. Alice huffed, shifting the baby slightly. Well, now you do both. Reed ignored their exchange. We'll have child services assess the situation tomorrow, but given the note, we need to be careful. This isn't just a random drop-off. Someone specifically wanted him with you. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face, willing the exhaustion away. And what if I don't want him here? Reed didn't flinch. That's something you're going to have to figure out. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Daniel wasn't a sentimental man. He had built his world on predictability, on deals sealed with ink and paper, on walls that kept emotions out. And yet standing here, staring at a baby he'd never met, one that somehow belonged to him, he felt something shift. It wasn't responsibility, it wasn't obligation, it was something deeper, something strange. Daniel stood in the center of his grand foyer, staring at the baby in Alice's arms, as if the weight of the entire situation had finally settled on his chest. This wasn't some unsolvable business deal. This wasn't a financial crisis he could fix with a well-timed investment. This was a child, left in his care, with no explanation beyond a cryptic note and the unsettling knowledge that someone had chosen him. The weight of it made his head ache. Alice, oblivious to his growing discomfort, rocked the baby gently, humming under her breath. The storm outside had calmed, leaving only the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windows. Baby Lincoln, because that was what Daniel decided to call him for now, had settled into sleep, his tiny fingers curled into Alice's sweater. Daniel exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. Alice shot him a look. What is? All of it. I don't know who he is, I don't know why he's here, and I certainly don't know what I'm supposed to do with him. Alice arched a brow. Well, considering you're temporarily his guardian, I'd start with keeping him alive. Daniel scrubbed a hand over his face. Don't be dramatic. Oh, I'm the dramatic one. Alice adjusted Lincoln in her arms. Daniel, there is a baby in your house, and you're acting like someone left a piece of lost luggage on your doorstep. Daniel's jaw tightened. Because that's exactly what this feels like. I don't do this. Alice's expression softened. No, you don't. But maybe it's time you learn. He wasn't sure what irritated him more, the fact that Alice was right, or the fact that deep down, a part of him knew this wasn't something he could just ignore. A sharp knock at the door cut through the moment. Daniel turned, brows furrowing. It was past 1 a.m. Who the hell would be here now? Alice's gaze flicked toward the entrance. Expecting someone? No. He strode to the door, pulling it open without hesitation. A woman stood on the porch, drenched from the lingering rain, her breath coming in uneven gasps. Loose strands of chestnut hair clung to her cheeks, her dark eyes filled with something Daniel couldn't quite place. Fear, desperation. Relief? Daniel stiffened. She looked familiar. I need to speak to you, she said quickly, her voice tight, urgent. Please, it's about the baby. Alice inhaled sharply behind him. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated for only a second. "Hannah. Hannah Carter." Her gaze flicked past him, landing on the sleeping baby in Alice's arms. Something inside her cracked. Daniel didn't miss the way her entire body tensed, how her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something but couldn't quite find the words. Then, in the softest, most fragile whisper, she breathed, "Lincoln." A beat of silence. Daniel's stomach twisted. She knew the baby. Of course she did. The way she looked at him, it wasn't just recognition. It was something deeper, something raw. Daniel took a slow, measured step forward. "Are you his mother?" Hannah dragged her eyes back to him, her breath shaky. "Yes." Alice gasped behind him. Daniel felt the air shift, thick with something unspoken. There it was, the missing piece. The answer to who had left the baby on his doorstep. But it didn't explain why. Daniel folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "You left your child here, with me. Why?" Hannah swallowed hard. The words stuck in her throat like a confession she wasn't ready to make. "Because I didn't know where else to go." Daniel studied her, searching for lies, for hesitation, for any sign that she wasn't telling him the whole truth. But all he saw was fear. Genuine, unfiltered fear. And beneath that, something else. Guilt. Hannah glanced toward Lincoln again, her body visibly trembling. "Is he okay?" Alice, still holding the baby, nodded slowly. "He's sleeping. He was crying earlier, but he's settled." Hannah's lips pressed together, and for the first time, Daniel noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly, the way her clothes clung to her, damp, old, worn. She looked exhausted, broken. And yet, she was here, begging to be let in. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Come inside." Hannah hesitated, then stepped through the doorway, shivering slightly from the lingering cold. Daniel shut the door behind her. For a moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the central heating and the occasional sigh from the sleeping baby. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Explain." Hannah's throat bobbed as she swallowed, her arms wrapping around herself as if bracing for whatever came next. "I had to leave him," she said softly. "I didn't want to, but I had no choice." Daniel frowned. "That's not an explanation." She inhaled slowly, visibly gathering herself. "I lost everything, my job, my apartment, my savings. It all fell apart so quickly, and suddenly I was out of options." Her voice shook slightly, but she kept going. "I tried to get help. I tried to find somewhere safe for us to go, but nothing worked. And then I thought of you." Daniel's frown deepened. "Why me?" Hannah's eyes met his, and for a moment something flickered in their depths, something that sent a strange unease through him. "Because your mother helped my mother once." Daniel went still. His mother? Alice's sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. "I didn't know where else to turn." Hannah continued, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought maybe you'd understand." Daniel felt his heart pound a little harder, his mind racing. His mother had been known for her philanthropy, for her quiet acts of generosity. But that was years ago, before she passed. And now, standing before him, was a woman who had left her child on his doorstep, claiming that history had somehow repeated itself. Daniel exhaled, trying to piece together the puzzle that had somehow become his life in the span of a single night. He glanced down at Lincoln, then back at Hannah. This wasn't over. Not even close. The air inside the mansion felt heavier than before, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Daniel stood across from Hannah, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Hannah, visibly exhausted, kept her gaze fixed on Lincoln, who still slept soundly in Alice's arms. Her posture was rigid, like she was holding herself together by the thinnest thread. Alice broke the silence first. "You should sit down, dear. You look like you haven't slept in days." Hannah flinched at the kindness in Alice's voice, as if she wasn't sure she deserved it. But she nodded, moving toward the couch, like every step took effort. She sat on the edge, her hands gripping the fabric of her worn jeans. Daniel, still standing, didn't take his eyes off her. "Start from the beginning." Hannah exhaled shakily. "I was a pediatric nurse at Savannah Memorial. I loved my job. I worked hard, never made trouble. And then everything changed." She hesitated, fingers tightening into fists. "There was a financial scandal, a mix-up in hospital funds, large amounts missing. I was one of the last people to process the paperwork, so they pinned it on me." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You're saying you were framed?" "Yes." The word came out sharp, filled with something unshakable. "I didn't steal a dime, but the board needed a scapegoat, and I was—" She hesitated, then swallowed hard. An easy choice. Daniel studied her carefully, watching the way she fidgeted under his scrutiny. "And what did the police say?" Her throat bobbed. "The police didn't care. I didn't have money for a lawyer. I lost my job, my reputation. And once my name was tied to a financial crime, no hospital would hire me. Suddenly, I was jobless. Then the eviction notice came." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "One day, I was saving lives. The next, I couldn't even afford formula for my own child." Alice inhaled sharply, glancing down at Lincoln. "That's why you left him here." Hannah nodded slowly, blinking against the moisture in her eyes. I thought if I left him with you, he'd be safe. I knew you could take care of him in ways I couldn't." She turned toward Daniel, her gaze desperate. "I don't know why, but I remembered my mother talking about yours. How she helped people when no one else would. I hoped, maybe, you'd do the same." Daniel felt something unfamiliar twist inside him. He didn't like it. "My mother is gone," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "She's not here to help you." Hannah flinched, but she didn't look away. "I know, but you are." Silence. Alice shifted Lincoln in her arms. "Well, I think we can all agree on one thing. This baby needs a safe place to stay, and right now, that place is here." Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. His entire world had been flipped upside down in the span of a few hours. He should have been sleeping by now, waking up in the morning to his usual routine, meetings, calls, investments. Instead, he was standing in his own home, caught in the middle of a story he had no part in writing. But there was a baby here, a woman on the verge of breaking, and a truth he wasn't sure how to handle. His eyes flicked back to Hannah. "What do you want?" Hannah hesitated, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to ask for anything. I want to be with him. I want a chance to fix this, but I don't have anywhere to go." She inhaled shakily. "I don't expect anything from you. I just need time." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't let people into his life. He didn't take risks that didn't have a calculated outcome. But as he looked at Lincoln, sleeping soundly in Alice's arms, something inside him cracked. "You can stay," he said, surprising himself, "for now." Hannah's head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. What?" Daniel crossed his arms, his tone steady. "Until we figure out what's next. But understand something, I don't do charity. This isn't a permanent solution, it's a temporary arrangement." Hannah stared at him, searching his face for something. He wasn't sure what she found, but her shoulders sagged in relief. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Alice clapped her hands together, her expression warm. "Well, I suppose I should set up a guest room." Daniel shot her a look. She can take one of the smaller rooms down the hall. Alice smirked. Oh, so you're letting her stay, but not too comfortably. Daniel ignored the jab. He turned to Hannah. You'll be under my roof. That means you follow my rules. No surprises, no secrets. Understood? Hannah nodded quickly. Understood. Daniel didn't believe her, not entirely, but for now, this was the best he could do. As he turned to leave, something about the entire situation felt dangerously unpredictable. He didn't like uncertainty, and yet he had the feeling that Hannah Carter and baby Lincoln were about to turn his world into something he couldn't control. Morning light filtered through the grand windows of the Hawthorne estate, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floors. The house, always silent in the early hours, was different now. There was an unfamiliar hum in the air, soft murmurs, the occasional creak of a floorboard, and the faintest sound of a baby stirring. Daniel stood at the doorway of his study, coffee in hand, staring down the hallway toward the guest rooms. He wasn't sure what had compelled him to pause. Maybe it was the knowledge that his once perfectly ordered life had just been turned inside out. Maybe it was the strange sensation of not waking up alone in this house. Or maybe it was the quiet sound of Lincoln's babbling coming from the room down the hall. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his jaw. He wasn't used to this, to any of it. He was still trying to convince himself that this entire situation was temporary, that he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his life, letting Hannah and Lincoln stay. And yet, against all logic, here he was, lingering. The door to the guest room creaked open, and Hannah stepped out, holding Lincoln against her chest. She hadn't seen him yet, her focus entirely on adjusting the baby's blanket. Her movements were careful, her touch instinctive, but there was an exhaustion in the way her shoulders sagged. Daniel didn't miss the dark circles beneath her eyes, the way she blinked hard, as if trying to force herself to stay alert. You didn't sleep, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Hannah startled, tightening her hold on Lincoln before looking up. She exhaled, shifting awkwardly. No, not really. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, studying her. Why not? Hannah swallowed, pressing her lips together. It's been a while since I've slept somewhere safe. Her words were simple, honest, but they landed harder than he expected. Something about the way she said it, without complaint, without self-pity, made his chest tighten. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was just stating a fact. Lincoln let out a small coo, his tiny hand grabbing at the fabric of Hannah's shirt, grounding her in the moment. She looked down at him, a soft smile touching her lips despite her obvious fatigue. Daniel wasn't sure why that moment unsettled him. Maybe it was the quiet intimacy of it. Maybe it was the realization that this woman, this stranger, had been surviving on nothing but sheer determination. He cleared his throat. You should rest. Alice can take care of Lincoln for a few hours. Hannah shook her head instantly. I need to be with him. Daniel frowned. He's not going anywhere. No. She hesitated, adjusting Lincoln's blanket again. But I am. His frown deepened. Meaning? She took a slow breath. I meant what I said last night. I don't expect this to last. I appreciate you letting us stay, but I can't get comfortable. The second I have another option, I'll take it. Daniel should have been relieved. That was what he wanted, wasn't it? Temporary. But the way she said it, like she was already bracing for the inevitable loss, made his stomach twist. I don't care what you do after we figure this out, he said evenly. But for now, stop acting like you need to be on guard every second. Hannah's lips parted slightly, like she was about to argue, but then she stopped herself. Instead, she shifted Lincoln in her arms and turned away. Daniel watched her retreat down the hall, the conversation lingering in the air long after she disappeared from sight. By mid-morning, Daniel had buried himself in work, doing everything he could to push the last 12 hours out of his mind. It should have been easy. He was good at compartmentalizing, at separating business from the chaos of emotions, but it was impossible to ignore the subtle changes in his home. The distant sound of Alice fussing over Lincoln, the quiet murmur of Hannah's voice as she hummed to him. It was unnatural, disruptive, and yet, for reasons he couldn't understand, it wasn't entirely unwelcome. He was in the middle of a call when the inevitable disruption came. A knock. Then Alice poking her head in, looking completely unfazed by the fact that he was in the middle of a business discussion. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. "What?" "I need a word," Alice said cheerfully, stepping inside before he could respond. Daniel sighed. "I'm in a meeting." "Oh, I'm sure your fancy billionaire friends can survive without you for a few minutes." Daniel muted the call, exhaling sharply. "What is it?" Alice folded her arms. "It's Hannah." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What about her?" "She's about 2 seconds away from passing out. She won't rest, she won't eat, and I don't think she's stopped moving since sunrise." Daniel frowned, shifting in his seat. "What do you expect me to do about it?" Alice leveled him with a look. "Maybe tell her to stop acting like a guest and actually take care of herself." Daniel rolled his shoulders. "She's an adult, Alice. I'm not her caretaker." Alice smirked. "Oh, you're definitely not, but you are the reason she's still in survival mode." Daniel's brow furrowed. "How do you figure?" Alice shrugged. "Because you haven't given her a reason to feel safe yet." That hit harder than he expected. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed, pushing back from his desk. "Fine." He found Hannah in the kitchen, standing by the counter, staring at a cup of untouched tea. Lincoln was propped against her hip, wide-eyed and alert, completely unaware of the exhaustion radiating from his mother. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a beat before speaking. "You need to sleep." Hannah jumped slightly, turning toward him. I'm fine." Daniel arched a brow. "You look like you're about to collapse." Hannah straightened, lifting her chin slightly. "I told you, I can't afford to get comfortable." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You're here. You're safe. Stop acting like you have to be ready to run at any second." Hannah blinked, as if the words caught her off guard. Then slowly, she let out a shaky breath. "It's not that simple." Daniel pushed off the doorframe, closing the distance between them. "Make it simple. For once. Take the room. Sleep. Alice will watch Lincoln." Hannah's gaze dropped to her son, her fingers brushing lightly against his soft curls. She wanted to argue. He could see it in the way her jaw tightened, in the way she clung to the weight of her own exhaustion, like she wasn't sure she deserved anything else. But then, finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Daniel wasn't sure why that single word felt like a victory, but it did. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the estate, spilling through the grand windows of Daniel's study. Despite the peaceful scenery, his mind was anything but calm. His fingers hovered over the keyboard of his laptop, the numbers on the screen blurring together as his thoughts drifted. It had been years since anything had disrupted his routine, his control. But now, an uninvited woman and a baby had somehow settled into his home, turning his carefully structured world into something unrecognizable. And yet, the strangest part of it all, he hadn't asked them to leave. A soft sound broke his concentration. He glanced toward the doorway, expecting Alice or perhaps Lincoln fussing from another room. But instead, Hannah stood there, fidgeting slightly, her fingers pressed into the fabric of her borrowed sweater. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said, her voice quiet. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. She looked better than she had this morning, less tense, less on edge, but there was still a lingering uncertainty in her eyes, a hesitation that hadn't left her since the moment she walked through his door. "You slept," he noted. A small, almost embarrassed smile tugged at her lips. "I did." He tilted his head. "And yet, you still look like you're about to apologize for it." Hannah exhaled a soft laugh, but it lacked humor. "It's just strange. Being here, sleeping in a bed that isn't mine, knowing I'm relying on someone I barely know." Daniel didn't look away. "Then why did you come here?" She stiffened slightly, shifting her weight. "I told you. I didn't have anywhere else to go." "That's not an answer," he said smoothly. "That's an excuse." Hannah swallowed, something flickering behind her expression. He could see the way her body tensed, as if she was weighing how much she could trust him. She had let him take her in, let him keep her child safe, but she was still holding back. "I remembered your mother," she finally said. "I remembered the stories my mom used to tell me about how kind she was, how she helped people who had nowhere else to turn." Her gaze softened slightly, as if caught in a memory. "When I lost everything, I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd be like her." Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of his mother. It had been years since anyone had spoken of her like that, since anyone had expected him to be anything like her. "I'm not my mother," he said after a beat. Hannah nodded. "I know." And yet, she had come here anyway. The air between them grew thick, filled with something neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Hannah took a small step forward. I wanted to say thank you for letting me stay." Daniel studied her, his fingers curling slightly against the desk. He wasn't sure what to do with this quiet gratitude, this unexpected weight in his chest that told him he wasn't ready for her to leave. Before he could respond, a new voice cut through the air. Well, this is a surprise." Daniel turned sharply, his stomach tightening at the familiar sound of heels clicking against the marble floors. Athena Langley. She stood in the doorway, perfectly put together as always, her fitted ivory dress hugging her frame, her hair swept into an elegant updo. She wore the same look she always did when she entered a room, one of confidence, control, ownership. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Athena." Her red lips curled into a smirk as she stepped further inside, her eyes flickering toward Hannah. "And you must be the house guest I've heard about." Hannah stiffened, instinctively stepping back. She looked from Daniel to Athena, something guarded settling over her features. Athena let out a soft, knowing laugh. "Oh, don't look so tense. I'm just dying to know how a woman like you ended up in his home." She turned to Daniel, arching a brow. "Unless, of course, there's something you're not telling me." Daniel forced himself to keep his expression neutral. He knew Athena well enough to recognize the sharp edge behind her words. She wasn't here just to make conversation. She was here because she had heard something and she wanted answers. Hannah cleared her throat. Daniel cut in smoothly. "That's none of your business." Athena's smirk widened. "Oh, but everything about you is my business, Daniel. You know that." His jaw clenched. Hannah glanced between them, her expression shifting. There was history here. She could feel it. Athena tilted her head, eyes glinting with amusement. "You don't let just anyone into your life. So forgive me if I'm a little curious as to why she's suddenly here." Daniel's patience was thinning. "Curiosity doesn't suit you, Athena." "Oh, but jealousy suits me so well, doesn't it?" She shot back. Hannah's fingers tightened at her sides, her breath catching slightly. Daniel exhaled, forcing himself to remain calm. "I have nothing to explain to you." Athena's eyes darkened slightly. "We'll see about that." Then, with one final glance toward Hannah, one filled with something unreadable, she turned on her heel and strode toward the door. "I'm sure I'll be seeing a lot more of you," she called over her shoulder before disappearing down the hall. The moment she was gone, Hannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Ignore her." Hannah hesitated. "She's not just an ex, is she?" Daniel met her gaze, something unreadable flashing in his own. "No." Hannah swallowed, nodding slowly. She could feel the tension still lingering in the air, the unspoken weight of whatever history existed between Daniel and Athena. And for the first time since stepping foot into this house, she realized something. She wasn't just staying in Daniel Hawthorne's home. She was stepping into his world. And that, perhaps, was even more dangerous. The tension from Athena's unexpected visit lingered long after she had left. Hannah could still feel the weight of the woman's scrutinizing gaze, the unspoken challenge in her voice. There was history there, deep, complicated history that Daniel hadn't cared to explain. And maybe he didn't owe her an explanation, but something about Athena's presence made Hannah's stomach twist with unease. She wasn't blind. Athena had looked at her like she was an inconvenience, an outsider, a problem that needed to be dealt with. And Daniel? He had been calm, unreadable, but there had been something behind his eyes, something closed off, something restrained. Hannah didn't know what she had walked into, but she was beginning to suspect that her presence here wasn't just an intrusion on Daniel's life. It was a disruption to something bigger. She was still deep in thought when she felt a presence behind her. "You shouldn't let Athena get to you." Daniel's voice cut through the silence. Hannah turned slightly, finding him leaning against the kitchen doorway, watching her. She hadn't even realized she had wandered in here after Athena left. She had just needed space, to breathe, to process. "I'm not," she said, though even she wasn't sure she believed it. Daniel arched a brow. "You hesitated." Hannah exhaled, crossing her arms. "She just caught me off guard." "She has that effect on people." Hannah studied him for a moment. "She doesn't like me. She doesn't know you. That doesn't mean she doesn't already have an opinion." Daniel sighed, pushing away from the doorway and stepping into the kitchen. "Athena and I have history. It's complicated, and frankly, it has nothing to do with you." Hannah frowned. "I didn't say it did." He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Then why does it bother you?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because she didn't know. It wasn't as if she and Daniel were anything more than reluctant housemates in an impossible situation. And yet, the way Athena had looked at her, the way she had spoken, so confident in her place in Daniel's life, it had struck a nerve. "I don't like feeling like an intruder," Hannah admitted finally. She made it very clear, "That's what I am." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he reached for the kettle on the stove, filling it with water. "Athena doesn't own this house," he said simply. Hannah watched him, caught off guard by the casualness of it. "No," she said carefully, "but she acts like she owns you." Daniel's hand stilled slightly on the kettle before he set it down on the burner. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Athena and I were engaged once." Hannah blinked, something in her chest tightening. "Were?" "Yes, a long time ago." She waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. It was as if that one sentence was all he was willing to give. A part of her wanted to push, wanted to ask why, wanted to understand what had unraveled between them. But she had no right to that information, not really. Still, something about the way he said it, like the past still had its grip on him, made her uneasy. "Does she still think there's something between you?" Hannah asked quietly. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers pressing against the countertop. "Athena thinks a lot of things." That wasn't an answer. Not really. But it was enough to make Hannah realize that whatever had existed between Daniel and Athena, it wasn't finished. Not in the way it should have been, and she had just unknowingly stepped into the middle of it. Before she could say anything else, a soft sound broke the tension. A baby's cry. Hannah instinctively straightened, already moving toward the sound, but Daniel caught her wrist gently. "Let Alice get him," he said. Hannah hesitated. You should take a break," Daniel said firmly. "You haven't stopped moving since you got here." Hannah frowned, torn between exhaustion and the instinctive need to care for her son. I don't want to seem like I'm not doing enough." Daniel held her gaze. "You left your child with me because you thought I could give him something you couldn't. You don't have to prove anything." The words hit her harder than she expected. She swallowed, her pulse unsteady. "I don't know how to stop." Daniel's grip on her wrist loosened, but he didn't step back. "Then start small." Hannah exhaled shakily. She wanted to argue, to tell him that stopping meant letting her guard down, and letting her guard down meant getting hurt. But for once, she was too tired to fight. So she nodded, and Daniel let go. A moment passed between them, filled with something unspoken, something neither of them were ready to acknowledge. Then, finally, Daniel stepped back, his voice softer this time. "Go rest." And for the first time in a long time, Hannah listened. The evening settled over the Hawthorne estate, casting warm hues through the expansive windows. The house felt different now, less like the pristine, structured environment Daniel had cultivated for years, and more like something alive. The distant sound of Lincoln's laughter echoed faintly down the hall, and from the kitchen, the quiet clatter of Alice preparing dinner filled the air. Daniel sat at his desk, but his attention wasn't on the reports in front of him. He was still thinking about the conversation with Hannah, about the way she had hesitated before finally letting herself rest. It wasn't lost on him how foreign that concept was to her. It had taken everything in her to trust him, even in the smallest ways. And yet, he found himself watching the clock, waiting, anticipating when she would reappear. A soft knock at his office door pulled him from his thoughts. Hannah stood there, hesitant, but more relaxed than he had seen her before. Her damp hair framed her face in soft waves, the fresh change of clothes Alice had given her, making her look different, like someone who had finally let themselves breathe. "You look like you actually got some sleep," Daniel noted. She gave a small, almost shy smile. "A little." He nodded, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "Come in." She hesitated for only a second before stepping inside, settling across from him. Her hands rested in her lap, her fingers twisting together as she gathered her thoughts. "I wanted to talk," she said quietly. Daniel arched a brow. "About?" She exhaled, her gaze flickering to the bookshelves, the polished wood of his desk, anywhere but directly at him. "About why I really came here." Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "I thought we already covered that." Hannah shook her head. "Not everything." Something in her voice had changed, less defensive, more vulnerable. Daniel remained silent, letting her speak. "I didn't just come because of my mother's stories about yours," she admitted. "I mean, yes, I hoped you'd help, but that wasn't the only reason." She swallowed hard. "The people who framed me, they weren't just trying to ruin my career, they wanted me gone." Daniel's expression sharpened. Gone? She nodded, her fingers curling into her sweater. The money that went missing from the hospital, it wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate. I was supposed to be the fall guy. They needed someone expendable, someone who didn't have the power to fight back. Daniel frowned. That's not just corruption. That's calculated. It is, she agreed softly. And if they were willing to destroy my life that easily, I don't think they would stop there. The weight of her words settled between them. Daniel had spent years navigating powerful circles, business moguls, politicians, investors who would do anything to maintain control. He knew when something felt like more than just misfortune. And this? This sounded like something far worse. Why haven't you gone to the police? He asked. Hannah let out a short, humorless laugh. Because the last time I tried, they didn't listen. To them, I was just an employee who got caught in a scandal. Her voice turned quiet. No one cared. Daniel's jaw clenched. That's not how this works. It is when you have no money, no connections, and no one willing to fight for you. She met his gaze, something raw flashing in her expression. That's why I came here. Because I thought maybe, if I could just figure out who was behind this, if I could find a way to prove it, I'd have a chance. Daniel studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. And you think I can help you? I don't know. She inhaled deeply, but I didn't know where else to turn. Silence stretched between them. Daniel could feel the shift in his own thoughts, the part of him that had been detached, calculating this as a temporary situation, starting to slip. Because this wasn't just about helping anymore. This was personal. You said the people who framed you wanted you gone, he said finally. What makes you think they'll stop now? Hannah swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't. That single admission sent something sharp through Daniel's chest. She was still in danger, and by extension, so was Lincoln. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his jaw. He was already running through scenarios, calculating the best course of action. This wasn't his world. This kind of mess, this kind of corruption. But that didn't mean he couldn't make it his world. I'll look into it, he said finally. Hannah's brows furrowed. What? Daniel's voice was firm. I have people who can find things the police won't bother digging for. If someone set you up, we'll prove it. Hannah's lips parted slightly, shock flickering across her features. Why would you do that? Daniel didn't answer right away because he didn't know. Or maybe he did know but wasn't ready to admit it. Instead, he simply said, because no one should get away with ruining someone's life. Hannah searched his face, like she was trying to figure out if she could believe him, if she could trust him. And then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she didn't feel alone. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like he was fighting for something that actually mattered. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine drifting in from the garden, the quiet hum of Savannah's night settling over the estate. Despite the calm, Daniel felt anything but settled. His conversation with Hannah had left something heavy in his chest, a mix of determination and something he wasn't ready to name. Sitting in his study, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled as he stared at the untouched documents on his desk. Business deals, contracts, negotiations, things that once commanded his full attention now felt secondary. His mind was elsewhere. Hannah, her story, the people who had destroyed her life and how easily they had done it. It didn't sit right with him. He had spent his life surrounded by power, by men who knew how to manipulate the system to their advantage. He understood control, how reputations could be made and ruined with a well-placed whisper. If Hannah had been targeted, it wasn't just by chance. Someone had chosen her, and someone had wanted her gone. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Alice stepped in, her expression softer than usual. "You're thinking too hard." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "Not possible." Alice smirked. "Says the man who hasn't touched his coffee in 20 minutes. Daniel glanced at the cup beside him. She wasn't wrong. Alice walked further into the room, placing her hands on her hips. "I take it you and Hannah had a long conversation." Daniel glanced at her. "You knew she wasn't telling the whole truth." Alice tilted her head. "I knew she was holding back, but I also knew she'd tell you when she was ready." She smiled slightly. "And she did, didn't she?" Daniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he let out a slow breath. She was framed, and whoever did it wasn't just trying to ruin her career. They wanted her to disappear. Alice's expression sobered, her warmth fading into something more serious. "That's not just bad luck, that's dangerous." "I know," Daniel said quietly, "which is why I need to find out who's behind it." Alice studied him for a moment. "And why do you care so much?" Daniel's fingers drummed against the desk. It was a fair question. One he had asked himself more times than he wanted to admit. Why did he care? Why hadn't he just sent Hannah and Lincoln away the moment they became his problem? He exhaled. "Because no one else does." Alice's expression softened. "Your mother would have liked her." Daniel's chest tightened slightly. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Alice gave him a knowing look before turning toward the door. "You should get some sleep." Daniel glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. "You know I don't sleep much." Alice chuckled. "Then do whatever it is you do when you're not sleeping. Just don't overthink it." She left him with that, the door clicking shut softly behind her. But Daniel was overthinking it, and he wasn't about to stop. Hannah stood in the nursery, watching Lincoln sleep. His tiny chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. His lips parted slightly in the kind of peaceful rest she had forgotten how to have. She reached out, brushing a soft curl from his forehead. "You don't even know how much you've been through, do you?" she whispered. Lincoln stirred slightly, but didn't wake. She exhaled, wrapping her arms around herself. She should have been relieved. For the first time in months, she wasn't sleeping in the back seat of a car, wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still running. Except this time, she wasn't alone. This time, someone else had stepped into the storm with her. Daniel. She thought about the way he had looked at her when she told him the truth. He hadn't doubted her. He hadn't dismissed her. And that terrified her more than anything. Because she wasn't used to people standing beside her. She wasn't used to someone choosing to care. A soft sound made her turn. Daniel stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, his sharp features softened in the dim light. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Hannah let out a small breath. "I could say the same to you." Daniel smirked slightly, but didn't argue. He stepped inside, his gaze drifting to Lincoln. "He sleeps well here." Hannah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He feels safe." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't." Hannah looked down, something raw settling in her chest. "I don't know how to." Silence stretched between them. Then Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I have people looking into what happened at the hospital. If someone framed you, we'll find out who." Hannah's breath caught. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Daniel cut in, his voice firm. "But I'm doing it anyway." Hannah swallowed hard. "Why?" Daniel didn't answer right away. His gaze locked onto hers, something unreadable flickering behind his expression. Then, finally, he said, "Because I don't like unfinished business. Hannah searched his face, trying to find the catch, the why, but there was nothing there, just honesty. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight on her shoulders shift, just slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod. "Get some rest, Hannah." He turned to leave, but just before stepping out, he hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet she almost missed it, he said, "You're not alone in this." And just like that, he was gone. Hannah let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand to her chest. She wasn't sure what was happening between them. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't scared of facing it anymore. The early morning light crept into the mansion, casting long shadows along the hallway as Daniel descended the grand staircase. His footsteps were measured, his mind already moving 100 miles ahead, sorting through the mess he'd willingly entangled himself in. Luca had sent a message just before dawn, something about finding an unusual gap in the hospital's financial records, something that shouldn't be there. Daniel knew this was only the beginning, but at least now there was a direction, a lead. The kitchen was already warm with the scent of fresh coffee and something faintly sweet. Alice was humming to herself as she worked over the stove, and in the far corner, Hannah sat at the breakfast table, cradling a mug between her hands. She looked different this morning, less tense, more settled, or at least trying to be. Her gaze lifted the second he stepped inside, her expression unreadable as she studied him. "You're up early." "So are you." Hannah gave a small, tired smile. "Lincoln wakes up at sunrise, whether I like it or not." Daniel glanced toward the adjacent sitting area, where Alice had set up a soft play area for the baby. Lincoln was happily babbling to himself, gnawing on a plush giraffe. He wasn't sure why the sight of it, of the baby so content in his home, made something inside his chest shift. Alice turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sit, eat something." Daniel smirked. "Is that an order?" Alice arched a brow. "It is if you want coffee." Hannah let out a quiet laugh, and Daniel, without thinking, turned toward the sound. It was soft, hesitant, like she wasn't used to laughing anymore, and he noticed that, which annoyed him. Alice placed a plate in front of him, then nudged one in front of Hannah. "And you, Missy, you barely ate yesterday." Hannah blinked. Alice waved a hand. "None of that 'I'm fine' nonsense. You eat or I start mothering you harder." Hannah hesitated, but after a glance toward Daniel, who was already reaching for his coffee, she sighed, finally picking up her fork. Daniel watched her carefully. It was still there, the instinct to brace, to expect that this moment of normalcy would be snatched away from her at any second. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the fact that she felt that way, or the fact that he wanted her to stop feeling that way. As if sensing his stare, Hannah looked up. "Did you hear from Luca?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded, setting his mug down. "There's something off in the hospital's financials. Some gaps that don't make sense." Hannah's fingers tightened around her fork. "Like what?" Daniel met her gaze. "Like large transfers moving through shell accounts, accounts that shouldn't exist." Hannah's breath caught. "That sounds deliberate," Daniel finished. "And if money is being siphoned through unofficial channels, that means there's more to this than just bad bookkeeping." Hannah's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "Then, there's a chance we can prove it?" Daniel exhaled. "There's a chance we can find who's behind it." Hannah let out a shaky breath, her hands resting in her lap. Who would even have that kind of power? Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You worked there for years. Who had access to financial approvals? Who had the authority to make these decisions without question?" Hannah's brows furrowed, deep in thought. "The board, obviously. the CFO, a few senior administrators, but they wouldn't. She hesitated, unless someone inside the hospital wasn't working alone. Daniel's fingers tapped against the edge of his plate. That's what I'm trying to find out. Hannah inhaled sharply, her eyes locking onto his. You don't have to do this. Daniel held her gaze. I know I don't. The air shifted between them. Hannah's expression softened, just slightly, something unspoken flickering behind her eyes. But before she could respond, the moment shattered. A knock echoed through the house, sharp and impatient. Alice glanced toward the front door, frowning. Now, who could that be this early? Daniel already knew, and he wasn't in the mood. Still, he pushed back from the table, moving toward the entrance. He pulled the door open, already bracing himself. Athena stood on the front steps, flawless as ever, her arms crossed, a slow smirk curling her lips. Good morning, darling. Daniel sighed. What do you want, Athena? She pushed past him without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking against the floor as she stepped inside. That's no way to greet an old friend. Daniel shut the door, his patience thinning. We're not friends. Athena let out a dramatic sigh, turning to face him. Well, that's just cruel. Then, her expression sharpened. I heard an interesting rumor yesterday. Daniel's jaw tensed. You hear a lot of things. Athena's eyes glinted. I hear you're looking into something at Savannah Memorial, something about missing money. Daniel didn't react. He had spent years perfecting his ability to stay unreadable, but Athena knew him well. She took a slow step forward. Tell me, Daniel, why would a man like you suddenly care about a hospital's financial discrepancies? Daniel exhaled, his patience wearing dangerously thin. Because something isn't adding up. Athena tilted her head, studying him. Then her gaze flickered toward the kitchen, and she smirked. Well, she murmured, I suppose that explains her. Daniel's jaw clenched. Athena turned back to him, her voice dropping slightly. You're getting involved in something you shouldn't be, Daniel. People with power don't like being exposed. Daniel arched a brow. Are you trying to warn me? Athena's smirk didn't fade, but there was something behind it now, a glint of something that almost looked like concern. Then she took a step back, adjusting the strap of her designer purse. Just be careful, darling. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked out. Daniel stood there for a long moment, his thoughts tangled. He had expected Athena to be smug, manipulative, herself. But she hadn't just been gloating, she had been warning him. And that meant whatever they were uncovering was bigger than they had realized. The air inside the Hawthorne estate felt different after Athena's visit, charged, unsettled. Daniel stood near the window of his study, his fingers tapping absently against the edge of his desk. Outside, the afternoon light stretched long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, but his mind was focused elsewhere. Athena's warning hadn't been a threat, it had been something else. A quiet, subtle sign that whatever he was digging into wasn't just corruption. It was power. And power, in the wrong hands, was dangerous. He wasn't easily rattled. He had built his empire on understanding the risks of every decision, on predicting consequences before they ever surfaced. But this was different, because it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Hannah. It was about Lincoln, and that made it personal. A soft knock at the study door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned just as Hannah stepped inside, her expression cautious, uncertain. I saw her leave, she said quietly. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Athena doesn't do anything without a reason. Hannah studied him. And what was her reason for coming here? He hesitated. Then, she knows. Hannah's stomach twisted. Knows about what? The investigation, the missing money, the fact that someone in your hospital was playing a very dangerous game. Hannah swallowed hard. How? Daniel shook his head. Athena has connections everywhere. I don't know how she found out, but the point is, she did. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, the weight of it pressing down on her. And what did she say? Daniel hesitated. She told me to be careful. Hannah's pulse skipped. That sounds like a warning. It was a warning, Daniel admitted, and that means we're getting close to something. Hannah let out a shaky breath, her mind racing. I should have known this wouldn't just go away. The people who did this to me, they weren't just trying to ruin my career. They wanted to erase me. Daniel's gaze darkened. And they almost did. The words sent a shiver down her spine. He stepped forward, his voice steady. But they didn't. You're still here. Hannah met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then she whispered, For now. Daniel's jaw tensed. That's not how this ends, Hannah. She exhaled. And how does it end? With the truth, he said firmly, and with the people who did this to you being held accountable. Hannah let out a humorless laugh. You make it sound so easy. It's not, Daniel admitted. But I don't lose. She searched his face, seeing something there she hadn't expected. Conviction, and something deeper. Something she wasn't ready to name. Before she could respond, Alice's voice echoed from the hallway. Miss Hannah, sweetheart, you might want to come see this. Both Hannah and Daniel turned toward the door. Alice stood there, her expression serious. It's the news. A cold sense of dread crept through Hannah's veins. She moved quickly, Daniel right behind her, following Alice down the hallway toward the living room. The television was on, the volume turned up just enough for them to hear. A well-groomed news anchor stared into the camera, her voice calm and composed despite the weight of her words. The latest in an ongoing financial scandal at Savannah Memorial Hospital. Newly surfaced reports suggest significant discrepancies in the institution's financial records, with several high-ranking officials now facing scrutiny. Hannah's breath caught. The anchor continued. While the hospital administration has yet to issue an official statement, sources close to the case suggest that these financial inconsistencies may be linked to previous allegations, specifically regarding a former pediatric nurse, Hannah Carter, who was accused of misconduct before disappearing from public records. Hannah's hands curled into fists, disappearing from public records, like she had never existed. The news anchor's voice remained steady. Authorities are now re-examining the details surrounding Carter's case, though no formal charges have been announced. We'll continue to provide updates as more information becomes available. The screen shifted to a commercial. Silence settled over the room. Hannah felt her entire body tighten. They're talking about me. Alice's face was filled with concern. Sweetheart. Hannah barely heard her. She turned to Daniel, her pulse racing. This wasn't an accident. This was timed. Daniel's jaw clenched. Someone is trying to control the narrative. Hannah swallowed hard. And that means they know we're looking. Daniel's gaze was unreadable. Let them know. Hannah's breath caught. Because there was something in the way he said it, something cold, unwavering, something that made her believe for the first time in this entire nightmare that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. The tension in the room was suffocating. Hannah stood frozen, her breath shallow, her hands trembling at her sides. The words from the news broadcast still echoed in her mind, looping over and over like a cruel reminder that no matter how far she tried to run, her past would always find her. Daniel turned off the television with a sharp click, his jaw clenched, his entire frame radiating controlled anger. Not reckless rage. No, Daniel Hawthorne didn't do reckless. His anger was measured, deliberate, the kind of anger that made people nervous. "Someone orchestrated this," he said, voice low and steady. "They're not just trying to bury you, they're trying to rewrite the story." Hannah exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her forehead. This means they know I'm still here." Alice, who had been standing quietly by the doorway, spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Then the question is, sweetheart, what are they planning to do next?" Hannah swallowed hard. That was the part that terrified her. Daniel pushed a hand through his hair before turning back to her. "They're forcing you back into the public eye, controlling the way your story is told. If they spin this right, they can make it so that even if we prove your innocence, no one will believe it." Hannah's stomach twisted. "They want me to look guilty." Daniel met her gaze. "They want to erase you." A shiver ran down her spine. Alice cleared her throat. "Well then, I say we stop letting them control the story." She folded her arms, eyes sharp with determination. "You've been quiet too long, Hannah. Maybe it's time to speak up." Hannah felt her heart pound. "Speak up how?" Daniel exhaled, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "We need to get ahead of this, control the damage before it spreads." Hannah shook her head. "I don't have power, Daniel. They do." Daniel's gaze darkened. "Then we take it from them." His words were like steel, unwavering, undeniable, and for the first time, Hannah felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. An hour later, they were sitting in Daniel's office. The heavy wooden desk between them felt like an invisible wall, a reminder of just how different their worlds had been before this moment. Luca's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "Whoever leaked that report to the press isn't just trying to stir up old allegations. They're setting something in motion." Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in thought. "Who benefits from this?" Luca sighed. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. But here's what I do know. The financial discrepancies at Savannah Memorial go way deeper than we thought. We're talking millions. Daniel? Money being funneled through shell accounts, offshore holdings, and a very specific chain of decision-makers." Hannah's pulse quickened. "Who's at the top of that chain?" Luca hesitated. "The board." Hannah felt her breath hitch. "The entire board?" But someone high up enough to pull the strings," Luca said. "And here's where it gets worse. There's a reason they needed you gone, Hannah." She gripped the armrest of her chair. "Why?" Luca hesitated again. "Because you found something." Hannah's blood turned cold. Daniel's gaze snapped to her. "What did you see?" Hannah shook her head, panic flickering in her chest. I don't know. I was just a nurse. I wasn't involved in finances. I didn't—" She stopped, her heart hammering as something surfaced in the back of her mind. "Wait." Daniel leaned forward. "What?" She squeezed her eyes shut, reaching back to a memory she hadn't thought twice about at the time. There was a patient, a child in the ICU. The family had insurance, but for some reason they were being charged out of pocket. Astronomical amounts. It didn't make sense. Luca cursed under his breath. "That's it. That's the link." Daniel's voice sharpened. "Explain." "The hospital wasn't just laundering money through shell accounts," Luca said. "They were inflating patient costs, making families pay out of pocket for services that should have been covered by insurance. They were double-dipping, billing insurance and the patient." Hannah felt like she was going to be sick. "And I must have flagged it somehow." "You must have," Luca confirmed, "because someone on that board saw you as a risk, and instead of firing you quietly, they destroyed your life." Silence filled the room. Hannah swallowed hard, her entire body rigid. This isn't just fraud. Daniel's jaw tightened. No. Hannah pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. What do we do? Daniel met her gaze, something unshakable in his eyes. We expose them. Hannah let out a shaky laugh. Oh, just like that? Yes. Daniel didn't even hesitate. But we don't just expose them, we control the narrative. Luca's voice cut through. You're going to need leverage. If they're willing to go this far to cover it up, they won't go down easy. Daniel smirked, a dangerous edge in his expression. Then it's a good thing I don't play easy. Hannah stared at him, a mix of awe and uncertainty swirling inside her. And what if they come after us? Daniel's gaze never wavered. Let them try. Hannah's breath caught, because at that moment she believed him. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't alone in the fight, and neither was he. The atmosphere in the Hawthorne estate had shifted. The air was thick with tension, humming with an unspoken urgency that neither Daniel nor Hannah could ignore. The moment Luca had confirmed that Hannah had unknowingly stumbled upon something big, the game had changed, and now they were running out of time. Daniel stood at the bar in the study, pouring himself a drink. He didn't sip it, just held it, staring at the deep amber liquid as though it held the answers he was looking for. Hannah sat on the couch nearby, her hands resting in her lap, fingers twisting together. We have to be careful, she said quietly. If they know we're getting close, they won't just let us dig. Daniel finally looked up, his gaze locking onto hers. They already know. Hannah swallowed. What if we're too late? What if they've already buried the evidence? Daniel set the glass down with a controlled precision. Then we find another way. His voice was steady, unwavering. But Hannah could see the storm brewing beneath the surface. Daniel was a man who didn't lose. He built his life on control, on power. And now, for the first time, he was facing something he didn't entirely control. And yet, he was still standing beside her, still choosing to fight. Hannah exhaled, leaning back against the couch. What's our next move? Daniel's phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. Luca's got something. Hannah sat up straighter. Already? Daniel nodded, pressing the call button. Talk. Luca's voice came through the speaker, sharp and focused. I dug deeper into the financial reports. The discrepancies go back further than I thought, years. And it's not just one person pulling the strings. Hannah frowned. Then who? The CFO was involved, that's clear, Luca said. But someone else had to authorize the payments, and I think I know who. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. Who? There was a pause. Then Luca said the name that made Hannah's stomach drop. Athena Langley. The room fell into stunned silence. Hannah's pulse pounded in her ears. Athena, she whispered. That doesn't make sense. Daniel's jaw tensed. Are you sure? Luca exhaled. As sure as I can be without direct confirmation. Her name doesn't show up on any official documents, but her company, her PR firm, has been receiving payments under different subsidiaries tied to the hospital's financial network. Hannah's breath hitched. She was covering it up. Daniel set the phone down, gripping the edge of the desk. His mind raced, piecing together the puzzle with terrifying clarity. Athena had warned him to stop digging, not because she was concerned for him, because she was involved. Hannah sat frozen, trying to process it all. She was part of it this whole time. Daniel exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. Looks like it. A sick feeling settled in Hannah's stomach. She had thought Athena's hostility was personal. Jealousy, resentment over Daniel's involvement in her life. But now, she realized it was something else entirely. It was fear. Athena had something to lose. Hannah turned to Daniel, her voice shaky. "What do we do?" Daniel finally looked at her, his blue eyes dark and dangerous. "We make her talk." Hannah's breath caught. "Daniel, I know Athena," he said, cutting her off. "She won't go down quietly, but she will protect herself before she protects anyone else." Luca spoke up again. "If you corner her, she might give you something useful. But be careful. Athena is smart. And if she realizes she's backed into a corner, she'll do whatever it takes to save herself." Daniel's expression didn't waver. "Then we give her no way out." Hannah inhaled sharply. She could feel the shift in Daniel, something colder, more calculated. This wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. This was a battle he intended to win. Luca hesitated. "You sure about this?" Daniel's voice was like steel. "Set the meeting." Hannah's stomach twisted. "Daniel, are you sure this is the right move?" He turned to her, his gaze steady. "We don't have time to second guess. Athena is the key to this, whether she likes it or not." Hannah swallowed hard. She knew he was right. But the thought of confronting Athena, the woman who had already tried to manipulate them, who had known the entire time what had been done to her, made her skin crawl. Still, she nodded. "Okay." Daniel studied her for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Are you ready for this?" Hannah's breath caught. She could feel the heat of his presence, the way his voice sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just concern. It was something deeper, something unspoken. She lifted her chin. "I have to be." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then slowly, he nodded. "Let's end this." The upscale restaurant was dimly lit, filled with the low hum of conversation and the distant clinking of glasses. It was the kind of place where power was exchanged in whispers over expensive wine, where secrets were bought and sold beneath the pretense of civility. And tonight, Daniel Hawthorne had chosen it for a reason. Hannah sat beside him in the private booth, her pulse a steady drum beneath her skin. Across from them, Athena Langley sipped her martini, unbothered, perfectly poised. If she felt the noose tightening around her, she didn't show it. Daniel watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "You're late." Athena smirked, setting her glass down. "And yet, you waited." Hannah forced herself to sit still, her hands clasped together beneath the table. The weight of this meeting pressed down on her, but she couldn't let it show, not in front of her. Athena turned her attention to Hannah, eyes glinting with something unreadable. "I have to admit, sweetheart, you're much harder to get rid of than I expected." Hannah's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. "I could say the same about you." Athena laughed, slow and deliberate, before shifting her gaze back to Daniel. "All right, darling. Let's skip the theatrics. You wouldn't have called me here unless you had something to say." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his presence commanding, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as glass. "I know everything." Athena tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "Do you?" "The shell companies, the laundered money, the insurance fraud, it all traces back to you." Athena didn't blink. "That's quite the accusation." Daniel smirked, but there was no humor in it. "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." For the first time, something flickered in Athena's eyes. A calculation, a shift, but she didn't panic. She leaned back in her seat, crossing her legs. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this fact, Daniel?" Hannah watched the exchange, every muscle in her body taut with anticipation. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That depends on you." Athena arched a brow. "Oh, this should be good." Daniel's voice dropped slightly. "You're not the mastermind, Athena. You never were. You're smart, but you don't take risks unless there's something in it for you. So tell me, who gave the orders?" Athena's smirk faltered, just for a second, and that was all Daniel needed. He leaned in further, his voice almost a whisper. You think I don't know you, that I don't know how you operate. You always align yourself with power, Athena, but this time you chose the wrong side. Hannah saw it then, the slightest twitch in Athena's perfectly composed mask, a flicker of something that looked like fear. Athena lifted her glass again, but her fingers weren't as steady as before. You're making a dangerous assumption, Daniel. No, he said smoothly. I'm giving you a way out. Silence stretched between them. Hannah's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Athena swirled the liquid in her glass, staring at it as if contemplating her next move. Then she sighed. You were always so damn persistent. Daniel didn't respond. He just waited. Athena tapped her manicured nails against the rim of her glass, then finally looked at Hannah. You really don't remember, do you? Hannah's breath hitched. Remember what? Athena exhaled slowly, as if debating whether to say the words out loud. Then, the child in the ICU, she said. The one you flagged. His name was Elliot Hartman. The name sent a bolt of ice down Hannah's spine. She did remember. A little boy, barely 5 years old. A severe case, but his parents had insurance. She had noticed the discrepancies in his billing, flagged them in the system, even asked a supervisor about it. But she had never been given an answer. What happened to him? Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Athena met her gaze, and for once there was no amusement in her eyes, only something cold, something resigned. He died. Hannah's breath caught. Athena continued, her voice almost clinical. And if you'd kept your mouth shut, that would have been the end of it. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Hannah felt sick. The hospital hadn't just stolen money. They had let a child die to cover their tracks. Daniel's jaw tightened. And that's what you were paid to bury. Athena's grip tightened around her glass. It was already buried, Daniel. I just made sure it stayed that way. Hannah's hands curled into fists. You knew, and you did nothing. Athena's gaze darkened. You think I had a choice? You don't know the kind of people who run this game, sweetheart. They don't ask for loyalty. They take it. And if you don't give it to them... She stopped herself, but the message was clear. Daniel's expression was unreadable. And now? Athena inhaled deeply, then leaned forward, her voice dropping. Now, I have a choice. Hannah swallowed hard. And what are you going to do? Athena studied them both. Then, with a slow, measured exhale, she reached into her purse and slid a flash drive across the table. Daniel picked it up, turning it in his fingers. What's on it? Athena's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. A gift. Daniel arched a brow. Why? Athena let out a humorless laugh. Because I don't lose either, darling. And right now, the only way I win is if I step off the sinking ship before it drags me under. Hannah's stomach churned. You're doing this to save yourself. Athena smirked. You say that like it's a bad thing. Daniel pocketed the flash drive. You better hope what's on here is enough. Athena leaned back, sipping the last of her drink. Oh, it is. She set the empty glass down, then stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her dress. Consider this my parting gift, Daniel. He watched her carefully. And what happens if you get dragged down with them? Athena tilted her head. Then I hope you'll at least say something nice at my funeral. With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Hannah let out a slow breath, trying to process everything that had just happened. Daniel sat back, the flash drive still in his hand. She just handed us everything we need, Hannah whispered. Daniel nodded. Now we burn them to the ground. The drive back to the estate was silent. The weight of Athena's confession, the evidence sitting in Daniel's pocket, the reality of what they were about to do. It pressed down on Hannah like a tidal wave. She had spent so long running, hiding, trying to survive. And now, for the first time, she was standing at the edge of justice. The people who had destroyed her life were finally about to face the consequences. But why did it still feel like she couldn't breathe? Daniel pulled into the long driveway, the mansion looming ahead, its windows glowing warmly against the night. He killed the engine, but didn't move. Neither did Hannah. She stared ahead, hands gripping the fabric of her jeans. I should feel relieved. Daniel turned his head slightly, studying her profile. But you don't. She let out a slow breath, finally looking at him. I thought the moment I got proof, the moment I had something real, I'd feel safe again. Daniel didn't say anything right away. He just watched her, the deep blue of his eyes searching, unreadable. You've spent so long looking over your shoulder, he finally said, voice quiet. It's going to take more than a flash drive to change that. Hannah swallowed hard. He was right. The truth didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the fear, the loss, the nights she'd spent wondering if she'd ever get her life back. She turned toward him fully, her pulse unsteady. And what about you? What happens after this? Daniel held her gaze. I see this through. And after that? He exhaled, his fingers flexing slightly on the steering wheel. I don't know. For some reason, that answer sent something sharp through her chest. She didn't know what she expected him to say, that he'd go back to his perfect, structured life, that she and Lincoln would just leave. She didn't want to think about that. Not now. So instead, she nodded. We should go inside. Daniel hesitated for a second longer, then nodded, pushing open his door. Hannah followed, her breath misting in the cool night air. The estate was quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of trees in the distance. As they stepped inside, Alice appeared at the top of the staircase, her expression laced with concern. Everything all right? Daniel pulled the flash drive from his pocket, holding it up. We have what we need. Alice let out a breath of relief, nodding. Good. Then her gaze shifted to Hannah. And you, sweetheart, how are you holding up? Hannah forced a small smile. I'm trying. Alice gave her a knowing look. That's all you can do. Daniel gestured toward his office. I need to send this to Luca. If there's anything left to dig up, he'll find it. Hannah nodded, but before he disappeared, she reached out, catching his wrist. Daniel. He stopped, turning to her. She hesitated, then said, Thank you. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then, his fingers curled gently over hers, just for a second, just long enough for warmth to seep through her skin, for her pulse to stutter. Then, just as quickly, he pulled away, disappearing into the office. Hannah let out a slow, unsteady breath, pressing a hand to her chest. She had spent so long convincing herself she didn't need anyone. But Daniel Hawthorne had become impossible to ignore. An hour later, the house was quiet again. Lincoln was asleep upstairs, Alice had retired for the night, and Hannah sat curled up on the couch in the study, staring at the fireplace as the flames flickered. Daniel walked in, loosening the collar of his shirt. He had been on the phone with Luca for the last 30 minutes, working through the details, making sure they had everything in place. He grabbed a drink from the bar, then turned, leaning against it as he watched her. You should get some rest. Hannah gave a soft laugh. I don't think I'd be able to sleep, even if I tried. Daniel studied her for a moment, then walked over, setting his glass down as he sat beside her. For a while, they didn't speak. The fire crackled, the warmth filling the space between them. Then quietly, Hannah asked, Why are you doing this? Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Because it's the right thing. Hannah turned her head, watching him. You don't strike me as the type who fights battles that aren't his. Daniel smirked slightly. Maybe I wasn't. Hannah swallowed. Then why now? Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, because you deserved better. Hannah's breath hitched, because for all the strength in his voice, there was something else there too. Something softer. Something real. She turned fully toward him, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. Daniel. His gaze flickered to hers, his blue eyes dark, unreadable, and for one impossible second, she thought he was going to close the distance between them, that he was going to reach for her, that the tension crackling between them would finally break. But instead, Daniel exhaled, leaning back, dragging a hand over his jaw. Get some rest, Hannah. She let out a slow breath, something inside her twisting, because she knew in that moment he wanted to say more. But he wasn't ready, and neither was she. So instead, she nodded, pushing herself up from the couch. Good night, Daniel. He didn't look at her. Good night. She lingered for a second longer, then finally turned, leaving him alone in the flickering glow of the fire. And Daniel watched her go. The news broke at dawn. Hannah stood in the grand hallway of the Hawthorne estate, her hands clenched together as she listened to the broadcast. Breaking this morning, an explosive financial scandal has rocked Savannah Memorial Hospital. Leaked documents have revealed a widespread insurance fraud scheme involving hospital administrators and high-profile figures within the city's elite. Sources confirm that millions of dollars were siphoned through fraudulent billing practices over the past 5 years. Her heart pounded as the report continued. Among those implicated is Athena Langley, a well-known public relations strategist, whose firm has been linked to efforts to suppress allegations and control media narratives. Authorities are now conducting a full investigation, and arrests are expected in the coming days. Hannah let out a shaky breath, gripping the back of a chair to steady herself. It was over. After months of fear, of running, of uncertainty, justice was finally coming. She turned to Daniel, who stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the screen with that unreadable expression of his. The man who had stepped into this storm without hesitation. The man who had fought for her when no one else would. It worked, she whispered, still trying to process it. Daniel exhaled, his gaze finally shifting to her. It did. She searched his face, expecting some kind of satisfaction, some relief. But there was something else lingering in his expression. Something she couldn't quite place. Before she could ask, Alice stepped into the room, her face glowing with pride. I never doubted you two for a second, she declared, and it's about time the truth came out. Hannah let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. I don't even know what happens next. Alice gave her a knowing look. Well, for starters, you live again, sweetheart. Hannah swallowed, the reality of those words settling in. Live. For so long, she had been surviving. But now, she had a choice. Alice turned to Daniel, studying him carefully. And you? What's next for you, Mr. Hawthorne? Daniel didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered to Hannah for the briefest second before he cleared his throat. Business as usual. Something in Hannah's chest tightened. Alice arched a brow. That's it? Daniel's jaw tensed slightly. That's what I do, Alice. Hannah felt a strange weight settle in her stomach. Of course. Daniel had stepped into her fight, but that didn't mean he was staying. And why would he? He had an empire to run, a life carefully built to be untouched by things like messy emotions. Alice sighed, shaking her head. Men. So stubborn. Daniel shot her a look, but Alice only smiled, patting him on the arm before disappearing down the hall. Hannah let out a slow breath. I guess that's it then. Daniel's gaze snapped to hers. What? She gestured vaguely toward the TV. We did what we set out to do. The truth is out. Athena's taking the fall. The people who tried to destroy me are finally facing consequences. Daniel was silent. Hannah forced a small smile. And now you can go back to your life. Daniel's eyes darkened. You say that like you're not a part of it. Hannah's breath caught. Are we? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Daniel inhaled sharply, his fingers tightening at his sides. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of them spoke. Then he took a step closer. Hannah, she swallowed hard. I need to know. His jaw clenched. I don't want you to go. Hannah's heart stuttered. She searched his face, her breath unsteady. Then say it. His throat bobbed. Say what? She took a shaky breath. Say you want me to stay. Daniel let out a slow exhale, his hands flexing like he was holding himself back. I want you to stay. The words were quiet, raw, real. Hannah felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. You're impossible. Daniel's lips curled slightly. I've been told. Her pulse pounded, the weight of everything, the past, the present, the fear, the hope, crashing over her all at once. She had been so afraid to believe in this, to believe in him. But Daniel had never walked away, not once. She let out a shaky breath. Then I'll stay. Daniel inhaled deeply, his shoulders dropping slightly, like the weight of that answer settled something inside him. Then, carefully, slowly, he reached for her, and Hannah didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, pressing her hands against his chest as he pulled her in, his grip solid, sure, home. For the first time in forever, she wasn't running. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was exactly where she was meant to be.